stand and let's worship together.
In the darkness we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. At the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father are restored. And the Church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By His blood and in His name, by His freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.
We're going to share a new song with you today. It's called My Testimony. And it talks about how when Jesus transforms our lives, people are able to look and see a difference. And that's our testimony to the world. So Satan fall like lightning. I saw darkness run for cover. But the miracle that I just can't get over, my name is registered in heaven. I believe in signs and wonders. feel the miracle that I just take it over. My name is registered in heaven. All of my praise belongs to you forever. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Sons and daughters, walk with blood and wash with water. Sing the praises of the Spirit, Son and Father. Our God will finish what He started. Oh, our God will finish what He started. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'll testify. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Oh, this is my testimony. If I'm not dead, if you're not done, greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done, greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. If I'm not dead, you're not done, greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. I'm not dead, you're not done, greater things are still to come. Oh, I believe. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. Oh, I'm glad. This is my testimony from death to life. His grace rewrote my story. I'll testify. By Jesus Christ the righteous, I'm justified. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. This is my testimony. Oh, I will testify.
It's time for the sleeper to wake. It's time for the dead man to rise as we open up the windows and let the light in so that we can go out and be the church and spread the gospel to the nations so that people may have life and have it abundantly in Jesus. It's time for the sleeper to wake. It's time for the old wind to change. Oh, I hear the Spirit say, it's time. It's time for the dead man to rise. It's time for the great light to shine. Oh, I hear the Spirit say, it's time. Fling wide you heavenly gates. Let the King of glory in. Let the King of glory in. Come. your time, sleeper.
It's time for the sleeper to wake. It's time for the old winds to change. Oh, I hear the Spirit say it's time. It's time for the dead man to rise. It's time for the great light to shine. Oh, I hear the Spirit say it's time. Bring wide heavenly gates. Let the King of Glory in. Let the King of Glory in. Come riding on your people's praise. Let the King of Glory, let the King of Glory fling wide you heavenly gates. Let the King of Glory, let the King of Glory come riding on your people's praise. Let the King of Glory, let the King of Glory.
Open up the windows, let the light in. Open up the windows, let the light in. Open up the windows, let the light in. Let the light in, let the light in. Open up the windows, let the light in. Open up the windows, let the light in. Open up the windows, let the light in. Let the light in, let the light in. Open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, let the light in, let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, let the light in, let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, let the light in, let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the King of Glory in. Let the light in, let the King of Glory in. Swing wide on your people's praise. Let the King of Glory in. Let the King of Glory in. Fling wide you heavenly gates. Let the King of Glory in. Let the King of Glory in. Come riding on your people's praise. Let the King of Glory in. Let the King of Glory open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, open up the windows. Let the light in, let the light in, let the light in.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for worshiping with us this morning. You know, right now in our time, we have a lot of different things going on, and it's never more important that we are the church. Hey, I wanted to ask, do you guys remember this from childhood? This is the church, and this is the steeple. Open the doors, and there's all the people. So remember that the church is not a building. It's not surrounded by walls. It's not in a particular place, but we are the church, sent by Jesus to make disciples. So as we meet and greet, let's think about what the church is and what it is not. And then Pastor Ben will challenge us to rethink the church.
Lately, it seems that we are getting more and more confused about what a church actually is. So let's take some time to set the record straight. Church is not a building, though a building can be used by a church. Church is not a denomination, though a set of beliefs should be important to a church. Church is not about Sunday, though a church should not forsake meeting together. Church is not about one person or personality, though every church should be pastored. And church is not about size or growth, though every church is called to make disciples. So don't think of church as an address or a location, but rather think of church as mobile and on the move. Don't think of church as something built or planted, but rather think of church as something deployed. Don't think of church as where you are for an hour each week, but rather what you are every day of the week, because the church is the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. Feet shouldn't sit still. Hands shouldn't be idle. Feet go. Hands do. This is the church. Church isn't what you're sitting through right now, because you are the church. Now go and be the church.
Well, good morning, Boardwalk Church, and thanks for tuning in today. I hope that you're having a good start to your morning. I hope that this Sunday is a day that you can truly sense and feel God's presence in your life. And welcome to week 3 of ReThink the Church. We've been talking about how should we redefine what church should look like moving forward. I mean, we've had plenty of interruptions in our lives, and especially over the last few months with everything that's been going on in our nation and in our world. We've had a lot of interruptions. But let me tell you something about interruptions. Some of the greatest things that ever happened in the Bible were interruptions. Well, the lady that had an issue with bleeding, she ran to Jesus through the crowd, reached out, touched his garment, and interrupted his life. And I think that some of these great interruptions that we're having are also moments for you and I to make sure that we can actually rethink what is important, what's vital, what's valuable in our lives. I know that some of you have joined some of the Zoom groups that we have going on, and even if you've missed the start of those Zoom groups, you can still send us an email at info@boardwalkchurch.com, and we'll make sure that you get invited to the upcoming Zoom groups that are ongoing right now, as well as some of the ones that we're going to have later on in the fall. But we want you all to be connected in community during this time so that you don't feel alone, and so that you have someone to pray with, so you have someone to talk with, so that you have someone to connect. And I've heard some great stories already out of a couple of our Zoom groups, especially with the Psalms that's happening on Monday night. If you've missed that, if you haven't connected, it's not too late. You can still get into that group. I know the leader of that group, Beth, would just love to have more of you join in on that Zoom group. Also, men, I'd love for you to be able to connect with me on Tuesday mornings at 7 o'clock. Also, we've got that ladies group happening on Thursdays at 7:30 at night with Victoria. And we've got a great group that's being led right now by Mason and Abby about being single and dating and engaged and married. And if that's you and you're interested in those things, please like I said, send us an email, info@boardwalkchurch.com. Let us make sure you can get plugged into one of those community groups so that you too can have community in your life during this time. Well, this is week 3 of us talking about rethinking the church. We've talked a little bit about how Boardwalk is going to restructure the church. And to me, what that really looks like is 5 different things that I would like to share with you today. And it actually still comes out of Acts chapter 2, but it's at the end of Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through verse 47. That's the little end part of chapter 2, where we start to see what the church is actually going to begin to look like. The early church, the first church. And I think it's important that we remember our roots, to remember where we came from, to remember the start of history for us as believers. Yes, it all started with Jesus on the cross and taking our sin and creating himself as the ultimate sacrifice so that you and I could have salvation. But the early church, what did the nitty-gritty look like? We know that the church, first of all, was not built for an organization. There wasn't dues or club memberships. There wasn't a special handshake or even something for you to specially say to get in there, except for the fact that you wanted to start following after Jesus. And I think for a lot of us, we've lost sight of the fact that the church is an organism. It's not an organization. Jesus did not build his church saying, okay, listen, you need four walls. You need to have pews that have a soft cushion, approximately about 8 to 9 inches apart. And you need to make sure everybody has the correct songs to sing, and that the pro presenter is working up on the screen, and that you have to start church at 10 o'clock or 10:30. And he didn't draw all these lines of what the physical church needed to look like. I love that about God. God gave you and I the ability to create, to make. And right now, it's a great time for us to create and make something new for the future for our church, Boardwalk. And God didn't look at Peter and John and James, and he didn't look at Paul and said, hey, listen, this is exactly how you have to start a church. He didn't say that these are the membership rules. He didn't say that these are the things that you have to absolutely do to make sure that people follow after me. I mean, those creeds and the things that came later on in life, they're helpful. They allow us to kind of have a little bit more ownership of what Jesus meant as through the Gospels. But in the beginning, he didn't do anything except look at Peter and say, Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, on you, the rock, we're going to build our church. What a powerful statement for Jesus to say. Not on an institution, not on a temple, not on an address, not on the size of a building, not on a flyer for marketing or campaigning, but you, the person of Peter, the truth that I am the Christ. We will build a church. I think it's amazing that God has called you and I to be active, living participants in building his church. I love the fact that the church is built by us, it's built through us, but it's built for him. And even in Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus was having this conversation with Peter, he wasn't hesitant in saying that the truth that he is the Messiah, and that Peter's going to use that truth, to that rock, that foundation, to build the church that you and I are a part of right now, the big C, the universal church of Jesus Christ, the idea that you and I are brothers and sisters of heaven, of Jesus, because of what Jesus said to Peter. I mean, the early church here in Acts chapter 2 had their own personal struggles. They had a lot of things that were going on that really caused a lot of confusion, and they didn't really know exactly what to do and what not to do. But out of the birth of the church, out of Peter standing up and preaching the gospel message, the good news of Jesus Christ, and watching over 3,000 people come to know Jesus and to be baptized, to be saved, just by Peter stepping up and praising Jesus, praising God, and giving the truth of who Jesus Christ is, people's lives were turned upside down. And we talked a little bit about this last week, that God has called you and I to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to help people change their concept and their idea of what it really means to follow after God, to change the concepts and ideas of what does it really mean to be a believer, to be a follower of Christ, that it's not about the X's and O's of what we have to do. The Bible is full of tools, not rules. I mean, there are things in here that are important for us to see and understand. And the truth is, you do reap what you sow. It's not just a yin and yang thing. It's a Galatians thing. The Bible says in Galatians chapter 6 that you will reap what you sow. What you put inside of your body, you will reap out of it. And the more that we soak in the knowledge and the truth of who Jesus Christ is, the more we will be able to help people see who he is, build his church, enjoy his church, and watch Jesus lead his church in a great and mighty way. Hey, let's dive into the scriptures right here and just look at what happened in the early church in Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 47. It says this: They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together, and they had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to one another as they had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of people. And the Lord added to their numbers daily those who were being saved. You know, one of the things that I think is really important for us, Boardwalk, is that we look at these scriptures in the application of what's really happening in our lives right now. See, the first thing is this, is it says that they gave themselves to some priorities, some big things in their life. The idea of going to church wasn't an optional thing for them. They went to church. They didn't question if they needed to give up a day or a few hours to get together to be with God's people. It was a priority to them. And I hope it's a priority to you in your lives. But they devoted themselves to some specific things. The first thing it says is that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. And in other translations, it says they devoted themselves to the doctrine. And some people don't like the idea of doctrine because they want to, fly the I'm a little bit more righteous and good than you are because I'm away from doctrine. I'm just the love of Jesus. Well, you can't love somebody if you don't know them. And doctrine is nothing more than the teachings, the principles of what Jesus said and did in his life. And the apostles are just trying to teach the people some things that maybe they don't know about. You know, I've tried multiple times over the course of my life to build things or to fix things. And I can't tell you how thankful I am for YouTube right now. I mean, just the other day, I was trying to fix a faucet in our bathroom in our house. And I had to make sure I needed to read the directions and follow it step by step. And I put everything together. And after I put it all together, it started leaking on me. And I'm not leaking like, in the sink, leaking underneath the sink. And so I knew I had done something wrong. I had a part that was not either in there correctly or not. And so I had to go in. And what I realized is that in the midst of me trying to fix something, I broke something. I don't know if that's ever happened to you before, but in the middle of trying to fix something, you break it instead. And so I had to go back to the hardware store and I had to get some new parts and come home and take everything apart, take some new things apart that I didn't really know what to do with it. And finally, after watching a YouTube video and finding some good instruction, some good teaching on what was going on, I was able to put it all back together and make it work. And you know what? That's what's happening right here in the early church. That's what's happening right here with the apostles is that they got together and made a decision that they were going to learn from Jesus together. They were going to absorb what it looked like to love and to learn. And right now, we have to make sure, church, that we are looking at Jesus for who he is and then look at him on how he did it. Some of the greatest things that we could ever do in our lifetime, Jesus did in his. The fact that he devoted himself to people that didn't have things, to love people that were in need, to stop and care for people that were hurting. We have a lot of hurting people in our society today. We have a lot of things that are going on around us, church, that we really need to step up and be a part of. To let people really see the love of Jesus. Regardless of what we've gone through as a nation, regardless of what we have gone through in our families, regardless of what we have gone through over the times of our lives. Today is the day of salvation. Today is the day of forgiveness. Today is the day that we need to act like the early church. To learn, to get together, to truly believe in what God is calling us to do. See, the first thing the early church did is that they learned. They took time to learn what was going on. And I think that's a foundational truth is that we need to learn what's going on in our society. We also need to learn to know what God says about these things. God's word is active, alive, breathing, truth-telling. And for you and I to be an organism, not just an organization that says, hey, please come to church with me, come sit in these walls with me, come tune in and watch something with me, but actually physically being the church. The church is built on you and me. It's built on conversations that we have with others. It's built on our interactions with others. I mean, honestly, there are some people that will never step foot in a church, but they will step foot in your living room. There's some people that will never go to a church building, but they will go to Starbucks and sit with you. I don't know about you, but I do believe that coffee and Christ kind of go hand in hand. Maybe that's just me, but I love the idea that we can sit down and have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee with someone and just talk to them about life and find those gaps, those openings where we can plant the seeds of Jesus Christ in their lives so that they can grow just the way that they are. There's an old story that kind of goes like this, that there were two pots that were put on a bar that a lady would carry down to the stream to fill up every day. And one of the pots, it was perfect. I mean, it was perfectly handcrafted, made, and it would hold a full gallon of water without any question. But the other pot, it was a little bit imperfect. The rim was a little bit crooked, and in fact, because of the design of the pot, it actually created a crack in its side where it could only hold a half a gallon of water. And every day, this woman would take this pole and she'd put it over her shoulders and she would walk down this path and she'd go to the river and she'd fill up the pots of water. And she would turn around and come home, and sure enough, she'd always have 1.5 gallons of water, never two. And one day, the story says that the broken pot was kind of a little bit bitter and angry and kind of sad that it couldn't hold a full gallon of water in itself in order to actually provide for the family. But the other pot that had the ability to hold a full gallon of water, it had the ability to do exactly what it was created for. And so it was proud, and there was a conversation between the two pots that, you're not like me, you're a little bit different. And so one day as they were going down to the river again, and the lady was carrying the two pots on the pool, she fills up the water, and the pot decides to speak to the lady, the one that's a little bit broken. And the pot says to her, why don't you throw me away? Well, why don't you get a different pot that is better than me? Well, why don't you find, someone else that actually can hold a full gallon of water for you and for your family? And why don't you just throw me to the wayside, because really I'm worthless and I'm not needed. Maybe that's you today. Maybe you feel like you're a little bit broken and a little bit beaten, a little worthless, excuse me. Maybe you feel like God could use someone else. That yes, you're a living, breathing organism, and yes, you have the life of Jesus Christ inside of you, but you're just broken, and you really wish that God would use someone else instead of you. Well, hear these words that this lady tells this pot. This lady looks at the pot and says, listen, I know that you're imperfect, and I'm glad that you are. Because what you don't know, little pot, is that for 2 years I've been walking down this road, this same path. And over the 2 years, I've been planting seeds along the path. Because I know that you have a crack in you, I also know that if I fill you up with water, you will water those seeds as we walk back to the house. And as we walk back to the house this time, I'm going to show you what I do. Because every time that I walk back with the water, after I get home, I walk back out on the path and I pick the beauty of the flowers that were created by the water that comes out of you. Because though you start with a full gallon of water, by the time we get home, the half a gallon of water that you have spread out over the path waters the flowers that I pick that bring the beauty into my house. Family, have you ever thought that in your brokenness, you are beautiful? In your brokenness, God uses you to do great and mighty things. Even here with the apostles, it's though they devoted themselves to the learning of who Jesus Christ is, they put that learning into action, and they were a living organism based off the truth of who Jesus Christ is to reach out and to do mighty things. Here's the next thing it says. It says that they also devoted themselves to fellowship. And fellowship is this idea of loving one another, of coming together, of being a church, a body, the hands and feet of Jesus, being able to overcome the evil that is in the world, being able to stand together, to fight together, to let you know that you are not alone. That's the idea of fellowship. That's the reason why in our new model boardwalk, when we get ready to roll this out in July, that we're having that big, small, smaller go and do component, that big component where we'll come together and have church and have a picnic and just love on one another and just a social event, really. And then the next one, the smaller, is the fact that we will have groups meet in homes and kind of come together and watch this teaching live, and then the smaller one after that, the fact that you'll be home right now and kind of watching the interaction of our worship service on your own, and then the go and be the hands and feet of Jesus, where we can actually be the interaction of Jesus Christ into the world. And they said that they devoted themselves to the fellowship. And it wasn't that, church is optional. It was that church is optimal. It was raised to a higher standard to them. It was something that they desired more than anything else. I once heard a man that's a little bit older and wiser than me say this: if God is present, why wouldn't I want to be there? If I believe that God is the most important, the most valuable thing in this world, if he's going to be present at something, why wouldn't I want to be there? I want to be where God's going to be. I want to move where God moves. I want to go where God goes. And the early church decided that the fellowship of the church was one of the most vital things. The third thing it says this is they also devoted themselves to the breaking of bread. Now, this is bigger than just communion. And this is what they called an agape feast, a love feast, where not only would they come and have the communion together and the remembrance of what Jesus did, but they'd get down and dirty and they would eat. I mean, they would eat some food and they'd get together and then they would spend some time feasting as the body. And they would spend some time loving each other. So not only were they a learning church, but they were a church that was loving because they loved the fellowship of one another. And then they got together and they ate. And you know what eating does? It brings life. It brings livelihood. It brings laughter. And so not only were they a church that learned and loved, but they were a church that was living and breathing. The next thing it says is that they devoted themselves to prayer. I believe that when we devote ourselves to prayer, when we devote ourselves to what God is doing, we can begin to realize that God is going to lavish his gifts on us. He's going to pour out an abundance of gifts on us. And it continues to say here that everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. They began to see the evidence, the fruit, if you would permit me to say, the fruit of what was truly happening. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers together and had everything in common. They had everything in common. They were working on one accord. They were going after the mighty prize. They were trying their best to use the gifts that they had to bless and nourish those that were around them. It says that selling their possessions and goods, they gave to one another who was in need. And every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of his people. Now, catch that. They didn't all just go out and sell every single thing that they had and just wonder where they're going to sleep at night. They began to give out of their abundance. They began to bless those that were in need. They began to do what Jesus called them to do: to learn, to love, to live, to lavish, and to be life-giving. They had a fivefold ministry. And I don't know if you've ever thrown a punch in your life or not, but I've seen many people throw them, and I've seen many people break their fingers and their thumbs because they really don't know how to make a fist. You know, some people they make a fist and they put their thumb in the inside of it, and you know what? If you try to throw a punch like this, you're going to break something. A ministry that is fivefold is a ministry that is powerful and mighty. Look at what the church did. Look at you and I. From the beginning, God used these broken vessels to water the seeds of faith in millions of people's lives so that the church could bloom and blossom into what it is today. But I don't believe that God is done. I said it last week and I'll say it again. I truly do believe that the church is poised, our world is poised for a revival. And though you may be broken, and though you may feel like there's nothing left inside of you, when you allow God to fill you up, he will water the seeds of faith that are in other people's lives. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing. Just like that pot that lady had. She used it because she knew that the imperfections of the pot would water the flowers and would allow the beauty of the flowers to grow. Will you let God use you today? Not to just invite someone to church, not just to invite them into a four walls component, but to invite them into the grace of who Jesus Christ really is. Following after Jesus is not about laws, it's about grace. If you do your history and you look back, when Moses was on the Mount Sinai and he was getting the law from God, this crazy riot happened down below that the people of Israel decided that they needed to have something to worship, so they created this golden calf. And when Moses came down from the mountain with the law and saw what happened, God demanded that there be 3,000 people die. When the law came, death came. But when Jesus came, and Jesus hung himself on a cross and died for your and my sin, and when grace came to the apostles and to the believers of that time, the Bible says in Acts chapter 2 that 3,000 were saved. Where grace is, life is. And God's calling us to be a grace-filled church that we can lavish the love of God on all people, even in our broken state. It's time for us to rethink who we are. It's time for us to rethink who God is. It's time for us to rethink what the church is so that we can go and be the hands and feet of Jesus. That we can point to his grace. And as we point to his grace, we allow other people to see his truth. Boardwalk, I hope and I pray that this week is going to be a blessing to you. I pray for God moments all over your life, moments where God matches you with someone else that just needs to hear a little bit more about Jesus. I pray that God starts to answer your prayers, that you can see him move and work in your life. And I pray that the fellowship of believers, the early church model, starts working in our lives, where we can learn, love, live, where we can feel the lavish gifts of God on our lives, and where we can become a life-giving church. God bless you, Boardwalk. I'll see you next week.
People come together, strange as neighbor, our blood is one. Children of generations, of every nation, of kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. And fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. His kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where our help comes from. I got a feeling it's gonna get rowdy. Swing wide, all you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All His children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Come on, sing it. Swing wide. Come on, sing it. Swing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All the children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Sing it. We've let the light in,
Our salvation
and it's time to worship.
is in His
Wherever you are, if you're in your living room, on your couch, on your back porch, in your house, wherever you are, I just want you to stand up. And in this moment, I want you to sing. I want you to dance. I want you to feel the freedom and the joy from the Spirit of Christ in you, through you, and flowing with you. Sing and put your hands together and move around. And let's worship our Savior this morning.
is in His blood. Jesus, light of
sing, we will dance, till the earth echoes the heavens in his praise, till we see the other side. We belong to the light. When the night is at its darkest, just hold on, for the dawn will soon rise. Can you feel the winds are changing? There's a new day on the rise, and the atmosphere is breaking. There's a new world close to life. So we will sing, we will dance, till the earth echoes the heavens, sing his praise, till we see the other side. All right, here we go, let's move, come on. Changing, there's a new day on the rise, and the atmosphere is breaking as the new world comes to life. So we will sing, we will dance, to the earth echoes the heavens, sing his praise, till we see the other side. I've got a feeling the darkness won't last very long. I've got a feeling the darkness won't last very long. I've got a feeling the darkness won't last very long. I've got a feeling the darkness won't last very long. There's a new day on the rise, and the enemy is shaking as the graveyard springs to life. Let us sleeping world awaken. There's a new day on the rise, and the enemy is shaking as the graveyard springs to life. So we will sing, we will dance, till the earth echoes the heavens, his praise, till we see the other side. Here we go. Come on, sing Jesus. Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in his blood. Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, his kingdom come. Have a good week, Boardwalk. Hey Boardwalk, we hope you had an awesome time worshiping with us like we had with you. And if you're a visitor, we hope you had a great time as well, and we hope you plan on joining us again soon. Just a quick scripture from John 14 to encourage you this week. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful. God, I just thank you so much for all that you do for us, for your love and your grace and your mercy, God. Just thank you so much for the sacrifice of your son Jesus for us, God. I just pray that you would just send the Holy Spirit to guide us as we go out and spread the gospel to the nations, Lord, that your name be praised, God, that we would decrease and that you would increase, Lord. I pray that over all of us, God, in your mighty, mighty name I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week, Boardwalk.